Thanks, everyone, for joining us for this webinar as we cover a very interesting topic at the intersection of technology and business. Today, it's all about how to make mergers easier on IT and how to make them more successful. Our webcasts are designed to be brief and focused, and we're hoping this format inspires you, our audience, to think about how technology impacts your own organization and how to engage with us. And I'll have information on how to engage with this webinar and our guests at the end of today's discussion. Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Wohl, and I'm honored to be the host of this webinar brought to you by Data Migration International, the home of the renowned JIVS information management platform, a platform that reduces data volumes, energy consumption, and operating costs while enhancing data quality, security, and compliance. I'm always fascinated about how to apply technology and services to help companies meet their IT challenges. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. And I've got two great guests joining us today from DMI. First, a regular on the series, a data migration expert, Jean-Marc Pestoni. Jean-Marc, welcome back to the program.
Good to see you, Bill.
And it's also with us today is Tom Belleman, a project manager and senior consultant. Tom, great to have you joining us today. I know you've got a lot to talk about in a real world customer example. So welcome to the program.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here.
So great. Let's start with Jean-Marc. Let's set some context. You know, we talk about mergers and acquisitions. Most companies think about them as an opportunity for celebration. It creates growth or innovation or a new direction. But mergers and acquisitions often create a lot of hard work for the IT organization. What's the story about why it's so much work?
Yes, well, it certainly is an opportunity that should be celebrated at the end of the day. But what happens is you will automatically add complexity to an existing infrastructure. You inherit systems, you inherit a landscape, you take on responsibility when it comes to data itself. And that is certainly an aspect in mergers and acquisition scenarios that very often is also underestimated at the end of the day. Plus, we shouldn't forget that those mergers and acquisition scenarios are usually on a fairly tight timeline. Mm-hmm. So you can't address every aspect at the end of the day. So what happens from a systems perspective is you usually take over those systems, they become part of your landscape, and then they sit there. And people start asking questions. Maybe you need some of that information for tax, legal, or compliance reasons, but customers tend not to deal with the ballast, the actual ballast that they inherit at that point of time.
Thanks, Jean-Marc, for that context. Tom, let's shift over to you a little bit. First, for our audience, since you're a first-time guest in our series, tell us a little bit about the work that you do with DMI.
Yeah, so I am a project manager and senior consultant. I have spent a lot of time running projects and content building with DMI for the last year and a half. Prior to that, I was working with the product on the customer side, as we'll discuss later.
Great. Well, that perspective is always useful. As Jean-Marc gave us the context about mergers, as someone in the IT organization, you're now faced with the reality of a couple of things. You've got systems that maybe you hadn't worked with before, but for the business units, for the company, it's the preservation and access to data that becomes a real driving issue, right?
That's correct, yeah. The data is needed long beyond the usefulness of the system itself as a transactional system. So I think with the JIVS application, you can actually maintain that data and keep it for the future until it's no longer useful or needed, and you don't have to worry about the system that used to hold that data as being active.
The goal is to think about data so that businesses can make decisions based on long-term data trends, taking advantage of the insights that's in the data that actually existed prior to the merger, right? The business continues to run. The merger is an event. What are some of the triggers that drive systems retirement? Why do companies want to shut systems down? Obviously, there's a cost consideration. What are those considerations?
Yeah, the cost of both the software itself, the software costs of the infrastructure, as well as the hardware costs of the infrastructure, can be cumbersome, as well as the staff that know how to run those systems. Over time and attrition, you lose the staff that knew all about those systems. So you've got to make it available to the people that need that data in the long run without having to go out and invest additional monies in finding someone that can run the system that's that old.
Yeah, not only do you have that system or that staff turnover and attrition, sometimes people just age out for companies that are buying into systems that were proprietary and written in a unique basis. Just having people who understand how to code those systems eventually becomes a problem, right?
That's correct. That's correct. And sometimes you end up with no one left who does know the system, but you've got the data and you still need to maintain that data for future reference, as you were saying.
Some of the driving behind why data is important, Jean-Marc, let me come back to you for a second. Not only do you want the data for the insights over the long term, there may be tax audit or compliance reasons, right? That data has to be maintained.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, and from a compliance perspective, you have regulations today, such as GDPR in Europe, which affects almost every international company. But you also have here in the US regulations such as CCPA, for example, that even tell you how to handle certain aspects of data, including the capability to delete upon request certain data. Plus, let's not forget, our customers also, yes, there are rules and regulations that tell you how long you have to take the data to keep the data, but they also don't want to keep the data longer than actually necessary. So that's important as well.
I find when we have these webinars for the audience, one of the best ways to highlight these issues is to talk about a particular customer case study. That's why I was particularly excited about the discussion today. Tom mentioned earlier that he worked on the client side. So we're able to talk about a project that took place because of the coming together of the businesses of Lafarge and HOLCIM. HOLCIM being a big manufacturer of building materials with a presence all around the world, 80,000 plus employees, a footprint in almost 80 countries. But in North America, these businesses came together, and that created a big business challenge around the businesses coming together. Tom, you were on the front lines there. What were some of the challenges as an IT organization you were facing as HOLCIM and Lafarge came together?
Yeah, there were a lot of, I want to say, duplication of systems, not necessarily the same software.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, it was the same software, but in other cases, two different types of systems were running. And in the long run, you only need one system for each of the areas. So when you've got this mergers and acquisitions going on, you definitely have a number of systems that will be no longer used, no longer active for the future. So when you're combining the two companies, you have to pick the path you're going to go down, whether it's the best of breed, whether it's the one that can handle the most of the transactions. And the other system needs to then maintain the data for a while, but eventually it'll be shut down. The question is, do you really want to keep it running in the current system, or do you want to move it to somewhere where you can get at the data, but don't have all the intricacies of those individual systems?
So there's some considerations that businesses go through about what system to shut down. One of them might be security, right? It's an older system and it doesn't meet today's
Right.
modern security standards. Can you talk about that for a second?
Sure, yeah. So, when you're going with the older system, when you have the older systems, because you're not going to work on upgrading them anymore if they're eventually going to go out, there are issues with those old systems with patches, both for the infrastructure side and for
Mhm.
the application side that need to be taken care of over the years. If you plan on keeping that software around for, let's say, an ERP system, then at least you've got a patch the infrastructure it's on, as well as the application itself to make sure that no one else can get in there and destroy your data or gain access to your other systems within the infrastructure that are on the same in the same area, same firewalls and that could lead to damaging the business as a whole.
Jean-Marc, as we think about this project, which is a really interesting one because of its sheer size, talk to the audience a little bit about how big a project this was. There were a lot of systems, a lot of hardware involved. Can you give us a sense of the scale of this project and maybe how long it took?
Sure. As far as the project itself and the duration, Tom, I believe he can actually give a little more insight when it comes to that. But the scale of the project, so we're talking over 90 legacy applications that at the end of the day have been retired into GIFs. So data separated from that application layer and now stored in GIFs. And not only that, we went down from a very complex infrastructure server environments down to really 2 servers, highly scalable in the cloud. So not only from a systems perspective, a massive reduction, also from an infrastructure perspective, really incredible reduction that this team achieved.
And infrastructure and hardware reductions translate into cost savings. That seems quite obvious. But Tom, as you think about this project, there really was a trigger that sort of kicked this off, and that really related to license renewals. Do I understand that correctly?
That's correct, yes. Both the ERP and the database licenses that the ERP was on were set to renew, and the amount of the renewal was going to be over $5 million for both the system and the database infrastructure portions of it. And on top of it, like you were talking about earlier, we needed to upgrade. There was nowhere else to go with the old ERP system other than upgrading if we were going to keep it running. So,
but behind all that, from a strategic perspective, we can talk about cost and risk and license renewal. Ultimately, preservation and access to data become the underlying theme. That is the decision process to use the GIVs platform, but the focus of the teams was to maintain the data while shutting all of this legacy down, right?
That's correct, yes. We definitely needed the data for longer than we were going to keep the systems themselves around. And the fact that we had over 90 systems, to bring it into something where all of it functioned the same. We weren't going into different applications with different, ways to query the data, ways to extract the data. In the GIVs platform, everything comes under one umbrella. They all function the same. So if you know how to access one system through the GIVs module, you can access the other systems in a similar way. It becomes very standard so that you only really train the user once and they can go into as many systems as you have and locate data that they need.
It's pretty interesting for those that haven't been through a merger acquisition before, that this concept of the user experience is really important, because behind the scenes, not only are a lot of systems coming together, you also have employees from different companies coming together, and the challenge associated with training them how to access that data once you've preserved it is something you want to avoid. I mean, you want to have people feel that it's comfortable and easy to get to the data. So that capability of GIVs to present a common user interface across multiple data sets, that becomes really important for the customer, right?
That's correct, yes. And that was one of the things, while we were doing all this as well, we were consolidating the functions between the two companies. And so you had users who've never seen the data before having to use the data. So the fact that with the simplicity of the access to the systems and their ability to get around was really a positive item for the HOLCIM group. So,
Tom, Jean-Marc mentioned earlier the scale of this project, 90 plus legacy systems. What was the length of this project? What did give people a sense of the timeline?
Yeah. The POC, which is we started out with to make sure that it would work for us through the end of phase 4 of the project, was a year and a half.
Hmm.
We had some phase 5 items that we ended up going longer than a year and a half because they were still using those systems. They hadn't been fully converted to the new system. So uh, those took another 2 years to finally obtain all those systems in read-only mode and move the data over to GIFs. But I say for a good majority, we spent a year and a half moving everything over, getting all the users trained, making sure that they could get at their data and everything. And for that many systems, that was a quick move for us. Everybody
Sounds
was
like it.
on board.
Tom, you being in the middle of it gives the audience access to what it was like to participate in it. Obviously, these projects are about streamlining and modernizing and reducing risk. How did you feel as a member of the team about the results? How did Wholesome feel about this effort? It took some time, but this consolidation was pretty significant.
Yes, and it was. Yeah, it was fairly significant. We used to meet in Toronto as a group. Every couple of months to make sure that we were moving along and getting systems up. We had several systems up within a couple of months, and then we started moving to the other areas and the big ERP system, uh, which we had um, had a deadline date that we had to meet, and that was the following June. So everything was focused. We had the IT, we had the business, all made have a major focus on making this happen within the specified time. And then the teams worked together and they understood where we were headed. We explained everything up front to all the users that they'd be able to get at the data in the future without having major issues or anything. They didn't have to learn a whole new system. It was more if you could work on the web, you could use GIFs. And I think that proved to be a big winning point, a plus point for the business because it was so easy for them to research the data and
Mhm.
find the information they were looking for in the system.
It's fascinating. Tom, one of the aspects that I think is always challenging for IT organizations is you don't get the luxury of shutting down the business for a year to do this. The business has to run, it has to perform, and all the other work that IT is responsible for also has to take place while these projects are going on. How does the project team still run the business, but stay focused on such a strategically important project like completing a merger and a consolidation of all the data sets?
Yeah. Well, as as this was taken up over a year after the merger occurred, um, we started off with those people who had worked on the um, transferring from one system to the other within
Mhm.
each area. And you use those people because they knew the most about the systems. And
Right.
we asked for their help in moving the system to this. The GIFs process is pretty straightforward. You attach to the database, you extract it, and you bring it into the GIFs database and you put the views over them. We have a lot of standard content at GIFs, and a majority of the items that we were looking for, standard content could cover that. With the help of the development team in GIFs, we were also able to create views from that were allowed us to the customized data in the old systems that not everybody, not all customers use. So it was custom to the Wholesome group, and we were able to work with the development team to produce views so that everyone could obtain the data that was in the
Mhm.
database. Nice, simple, streamlined process for everyone.
I think all of us that have worked in the IT industry are always trying to apply best practices and not reinvent the wheel every time, but every project and every company is unique. Now that you've stepped out of Wholesome and work for DMI, how do you apply that experience to other clients? And what are they looking for that's the most important? And I'm going to get a sense that I'm going to anticipate that they're looking for a standardized process that makes the whole project run more successful. Am I correct?
Yes, you're correct. Yeah. It's really good for project, to make the project work well is have the business users give the IT team their requirements, such as I need to see this customer and this set of information. Once the requirements are there, then with the internal IT teams that are running the systems currently, as well as the GIFs teams, the necessary views can be created in within the system, and it doesn't take a lot of work. It's just putting the data together so that everybody can access it, and it's a smooth process where we have completeness reports to show that all the data came over, which will be very good for legal and tax and compliance.
Mhm.
And under these new systems, the security is as well was set up to match the old systems. So the simplest part of the process was just getting the business really to tell us what they were looking for, and then IT could go off and create it, and it didn't take a lot of the business time. Business only had to come back and do UAT once we had produced those reports for them.
That's helpful, Tom. One last question that I want to send to your way. It seems to me that people think about mergers and acquisition activity as you get it done and move on. But one of the benefits of going through this process, besides streamlining and modernization, is that typically companies wind up with a better discipline and hygiene around managing their data. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, because in the past, a lot of times you just let the data sit out there and run in the background,
Hmm.
and you don't know who has access to it in the future and that. Where if you move it all under the GIVs umbrella, the data's available, you have access, that you can grant to whoever needs it. And it's not something where you have to worry, oh, this server's got to come be started again, that server's got to be started again. Where did we place this? It's all in one location. We do a lot of the work in the cloud. So if you enjoy working in the cloud, this works well there. And we just move it forward with all your data housed in one place where you can systematically basically remove the data what's no longer needed.
Great.
And it just makes it cleaner once it's all in one area of the company. So
Well, it's great to have your perspective, having been involved in the Wholesome project and now doing that for other customers. So thanks, Tom, very much for that information. Jean-Marc, let me come back to you
yeah.
as we close up our program today. There's a lot that goes into these projects. As we think about the Wholesome project, what are some of the top headline lessons learned that customers can benefit from as we think about this particular project?
Well, I believe this particular project actually also reflects the situation of many of our customers. So, they grow based on mergers and acquisitions. They inherit a landscape that makes everything more complex, more challenging also to take care of. And what we see is that in many cases, companies don't address that topic early enough.
Right.
So it's being neglected. You add more and more legacy systems that are not really crucial from an operational perspective. And but at the end of the day, Holcim took that step, prioritized, and said, we actually start with a housekeeping initiative before we even look forward as far as a transformation goes. Maybe into an SAP S4 is what we see quite a bit in the market.
Mhm.
So they start with housekeeping first and
Right.
reduce that complexity. The TCO is incredible with those projects. So they create a very attractive business case as well. And to really start that early and bring in a product like GIFs that is easy to use also for the end users in the future, and that will retain data in a lasting way, in a transparent way, without changing the structure of it. It's not proprietary suddenly, and it doesn't put the customer into a situation where he put all that data into a dead-end solution. What I like about this approach is that the customer looked at GIFs and said, I understand this is an integrated platform. I understand I can reuse that data. So not only access it and use it, but also reuse it for future purposes. And I think they did an excellent job evaluating different solutions. And that's really the way to go. And to also test those solutions in a POC. We can promise everything in webinars, in marketing materials. At the end of the day, it's really success stories such as HOLCIM that prove and make the point.
That's a great point and a great way to end it. Of course, we always say it's about finding people with the expertise that have done it before. So, Tom, it was great to have you on the program and bring your experience in. Jean-Marc, thank you as well for joining us. And I want to thank everyone at Data Migration International for making this webinar series possible. We welcome you, our audience, to bring your comments and questions into the discussions about this webinar. You can engage with us at the official JIVS LinkedIn and Twitter accounts. So please be a part of that discussion. And of course, you can learn more about DMI and the JIVS platform at jivs.com. I'm your host, Bill Wohl, and for everyone at DMI, thanks for joining.
Thank you so much,
everyone. Thank you.